Before we begin, if you want to see more real-life horror, mysterious, and spine-chilling stories like this, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so that every new video comes straight to your phone. Now, let's dive into today's terrifying story.
Alan Parker had always heard people talk about the strange energy tucked away in the forgotten corners of America, but he never believed much of it until the night he and his girlfriend, Gloria Hayes, stepped inside the Stanley Ridge Hotel, an isolated, century-old mountain lodge tucked deep within the snowy wilderness of Colorado, famous and infamous for being the inspiration behind Stephen King's Stay decades earlier. But for Alan and Gloria, the place wasn't supposed to be anything more than an affordable getaway for their one-year anniversary. They were young, in their mid-20s, still figuring out careers and dreaming about what their lives could be, and when every luxury hotel near Estes Park slapped them with outrageous holiday prices, the Stanley Ridge Hotel felt like a miracle, 5-star, beautifully preserved, mysteriously affordable. Too affordable. Yet they didn't question it. They were excited, foolish, and naive enough to think cheap meant lucky, not dangerous. Snowfall surrounded the mountain highway as they drove upward, windshield wipers beating back waves of icy flakes. The forest lining the road seemed frozen in time, the trunks tall and lifeless, their branches heavy with snow like skeletal arms reaching toward the sky. When they finally arrived, the hotel stood out like a relic untouched by the world, its Victorian-style white exterior illuminated beneath hanging lanterns that flickered with a warm, buttery glow. The lobby was quiet, unnervingly quiet. A single receptionist with tired eyes checked them in while classical music hummed somewhere in the background, echoing faintly off the walls. Alan glanced at the key tag as the receptionist slid it forward. Room 217. The brass numbers felt colder than they should have when he picked them up. Second floor, stairs to the left, the receptionist instructed with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They didn't pay attention to the subtle hesitation lingering in his voice. They should have. Once they climbed the wooden staircase, the sounds of the lobby faded until there was nothing, no guests, no footsteps, no voices, only a silence that pressed against their ears. The hallway stretched long and empty, lamps glowing dimly along the patterned carpet. Gloria playfully nudged Alan and whispered, "Looks like we got the whole place to ourselves." Her tone was light, teasing, but Alan sensed something different the moment they reached the second floor. The air felt heavier, stiller. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though someone else's steps followed half a beat behind their own. He paused, glancing over his shoulder. Nothing. Just a long empty corridor lined with closed doors. When they unlocked room 217, they found it spotless, too spotless, like someone with a compulsive need for perfection had scrubbed every corner until not a single speck of dust remained. Everything sat in perfect order, the linens tightly tucked, pillows fluffed, furniture aligned with geometrical precision. It would have impressed Alan if something about it didn't feel watched. Ignoring it, they tossed their winter coats across the chairs, dropped their duffel bags near the foot of the bed, and collapsed onto the mattress with laughter echoing off the walls. But the moment their laughter faded, the room felt different, as if it absorbed their joy too quickly, too hungrily. Alan felt it before he understood it, an uncanny sensation creeping up the back of his neck. A feeling of being observed. He brushed it off at first, shaking his head and telling himself he was just exhausted from the drive. But the sensation persisted. He kept glancing toward the corners of the room, convinced he would find someone standing there, half in shadow. He didn't want to worry Gloria, but he finally muttered, "Does it feel like someone else is in here?" She gave him a puzzled look. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Just feels like we're not alone." To reassure himself, he checked the door. The latch was locked. Then he paced around the room, checking behind the curtains, inside the bathroom, even opening the wardrobe. Nothing. When he emerged from the bathroom, he noticed Gloria wasn't in the room. His heart jolted for a second, but then she stepped back inside from the hallway, brushing off snowflakes from her shoulders. "I thought I heard kids playing outside," she said. I swear there were voices. Alan frowned. Kids? At this hour? In this weather? She shrugged uneasily. I didn't see anyone. But I definitely heard something. That didn't make Alan feel any better. Still, they eventually crawled beneath the crisp, cold sheets, trying to shake off the oddness of the evening. The room's ancient radiator hissed softly as it warmed, and the building occasionally creaked like old bones settling in place. After a while, Gloria drifted into sleep, her breathing relaxing into a gentle rhythm. But Alan tossed, restless, haunted by the sense that something unseen hovered near the bed. Sometime after midnight, while the dim glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the walls, Alan felt a pressure near his face, warm breath, too close, too deliberate. Then a cracked, whispering voice rasped inches from his ear. He shot upright, heart slamming against his ribs, eyes darting wildly through the darkened room. No one was there. Just the room, silent and suffocating. He tried convincing himself it was a dream until he heard it again, distant laughter of children echoing from the hallway beyond the door. He checked the time. 2:03 a.m. No child would be wandering a historic hotel at that hour, especially in the dead of winter. Against every reasonable instinct, he slipped out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor as he approached the door. He opened it cautiously and peered into the dim corridor. Darkness swallowed everything except the faint glow of the wall lamps flickering at irregular intervals. Just when he began to close the door, movement caught his eye. A small figure stood halfway down the hall, the silhouette of a little girl, facing him, absolutely motionless. Alan's breath caught in his throat. She didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't move. She only stared. "Hey, it's really late," he whispered nervously. "You shouldn't be out here." The girl tilted her head slightly, the gesture unnervingly slow. Before he could say anything more, a blood-curdling scream erupted from inside room 217. "Gloria!" Alan spun and sprinted back into the room. What he saw froze him in place. A pale, elderly woman with hollow eyes and hair as gray as ash was bent over Gloria, her gnarled fingers wrapped around Gloria's throat. Gloria thrashed desperately, gasping for breath. The woman's expression was furious, almost offended, as if Gloria's very presence violated her space. Alan lunged forward with a shout, but before he could reach them, the woman's head snapped toward him, her eyes burning with cold rage. Then she turned and drifted swiftly toward the window. Without opening it, without breaking the glass, she passed through it, vanishing into the swirling snow outside as if dissolving into the night. Gloria coughed violently, gasping for air as Alan grabbed her, shaking. "We have to leave," he said, voice trembling. She nodded weakly. Fear had gripped them both like a vice. They shoved their belongings into their bags with trembling hands, bolted out the door, and rushed down the staircase, desperate to escape the suffocating dread of the second floor. In the lobby, the receptionist looked startled to see them so frantic. "Where are you going?" he asked. "It's dangerous outside, there's a snowstorm." Alan slammed the key onto the desk and snapped, "Your hotel is haunted." Something attacked her. The receptionist flinched when he saw the key's brass tag. Room 217. His expression darkened. He exhaled slowly and whispered, "I knew this would happen." The receptionist's voice trembled as he glanced between the shaken couple and the ominous brass tag lying on the counter, his pupils shrinking with a kind of dread he clearly tried to hide but couldn't restrain, and before Alan or Gloria could demand answers, the old wooden doors of the Stanley Ridge Hotel groaned under a violent gust of wind that rattled the chandeliers overhead, making the bulbs flicker as if the building itself were shuddering in fear. The receptionist hesitated, leaning in as though confiding a dangerous secret, whispering, "Room 217 should never have been opened. It wasn't supposed to be occupied tonight. Something must have reset the system." His words made Gloria's already trembling knees weaken, and Alan clenched his jaw as anger and terror blurred together inside him, but before he could react, the entire lobby plunged into darkness. A power outage. The storm howled against the windows, snow battering the glass with furious persistence, and in the pitch black, Gloria grabbed Alan's arm with a gasp, her fingers ice-cold. They heard footsteps above them, soft, slow, deliberate, as though someone was pacing directly over the reception desk. But room 217 was not above the lobby. That floor belonged to abandoned storage rooms sealed decades earlier. The receptionist fumbled for a flashlight, and when the beam finally flicked on, its shaky light revealed something that made Alan step instinctively in front of Gloria. Near the base of the staircase stood the same little girl he had seen in the hallway earlier. Her dress was white but soaked at the hem as though she had walked through snow. Her hair hung in wet strands across her face. She stared at them with wide, lifeless eyes, completely unblinking. The receptionist nearly dropped the flashlight. "Oh God, not again," he whispered, backing away until he hit the wall. Alan felt a surge of protective rage. What the hell is going on in this hotel? But before the receptionist could answer, the girl raised her arm and pointed, not at Alan, not at Gloria, but at the main entrance doors behind them. Slowly, the brass handles began to turn on their own. The doors pushed inward as if an unseen force was trying to enter the building. A freezing draft swept across the lobby floor, and the fireplace at the far end roared to life without anyone touching it, flames blasting upward like a flare. Gloria clutched Alan tighter, her voice cracking. "We can't stay here." The receptionist grabbed a ring of old keys from beneath the counter, his frantic breaths visible in the icy air. "Follow me," he ordered. "If you want to survive until morning, you need to see something." Alan didn't trust him, but he didn't have time to debate. They followed him through a narrow hallway behind the desk, past old photographs of the hotel from the early 1900s, black and white images of snow-covered mountains, the original staff posing stiffly in front of the building, and one picture that made Gloria stop in her tracks. "Alan, look." In the photograph stood rows of employees, but one figure in the back, a little girl, appeared blurred, almost transparent. Her white dress and wet hair were unmistakable. It was her. The same girl in the lobby. Alan felt his throat tighten, but the receptionist urged them forward, unlocking a heavy oak door with a rusted key. The room behind it was dim but warmer, illuminated by a circle of old lanterns. The space felt older than the rest of the hotel, untouched by the renovations seen elsewhere. Newspaper clippings covered the walls, each yellowed with age, edges curled by decades of neglect. The headlines were disturbing: family tragedy at Stanley Ridge, mother found dead in room 217, guest disappears during blizzard, no body recovered, hotel temporarily shutters after multiple unexplained incidents. Gloria scanned the articles, her breath quickening until she found a faded black and white photograph clipped beside one of the oldest pieces. Her voice wavered. "Alan, this is her." The photo showed a little girl standing beside a tall Victorian woman with a rigid posture. The woman's eyes were cold and empty, the same hollow glare of the figure Alan had seen choking Gloria. The receptionist finally spoke, his voice trembling. The woman's name was Margaret Hollander. She was the original owner's wife, the one who lived here before the hotel was restored. People said she was strict, deeply traditional, overly protective of her child. But one winter, the girl went missing in the storm. Her body was never found. Margaret lost her mind. She became violent with guests who stayed in their old room, room 217, believing they were intruders replacing her family. Alan felt every hair on his neck rise. "You mean the woman who attacked us?" The receptionist nodded gravely. "Margaret." Gloria swallowed hard. "And the girl?" "Her spirit never left. She wanders the halls looking for warmth, for anyone who can hear her cries." Alan clenched his fists, trying to steady the tremor in his voice. "We need to leave this place. Car, truck, snowmobile, I don't care what. We're not staying." But the receptionist shook his head. The storm is too strong. Roads are buried. You wouldn't make it a mile. As if to punctuate his words, thunder rumbled, an unnatural sound for a snowstorm, and the walls shuddered. A lantern flickered violently, nearly going out. Then the girl's voice whispered from somewhere inside the room. Cold, so cold, Gloria screamed, spinning around, but the room was empty. The whisper came again, this time right behind Alan's ear. Help, me, the receptionist backed toward the door, fumbling with the key, but before he could insert it, the heavy oak door slammed shut on its own, sealing them inside. The lanterns dimmed, their flames shrinking as icy gusts swirled around the floor. Something scraped along the ceiling above them, slow and dragging, as though claws were carving through the beams. Alan grabbed Gloria's hand and pulled her behind him as the temperature plummeted. Their breaths turned to visible mist, drifting toward the center of the room. Then the lanterns went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. Alan felt Gloria's fingernails dig into his arm, heard her panicked breathing. Alan, something's here, she whispered. A faint glow appeared in the far corner. The little girl stepped forward, her face pale and mournful, water dripping from her dress and pooling onto the wooden floor despite the total absence of melting snow. She extended a trembling hand. She's coming, the girl whispered. She's angry. The sound of dragging footsteps grew louder overhead, pacing faster and faster, until the ceiling rattled violently with each heavy thud. The receptionist dropped to his knees, whispering prayers under his breath. She knows you left the room, he stammered. She thinks you're taking her daughter away. Alan tried to move, tried to pull Gloria toward the opposite wall, but a sudden thunderous crack split the ceiling. Dust showered down. Something forced its way through the floorboards above. Then a hand, pale, skeletal, and trembling with rage, broke through the ceiling, fingers curled like talons. Gloria shrieked as the hand grasped the air, searching, clawing. The girl stepped backward, shaking her head desperately. You can't hide from her, the child whispered. She never stops. The ceiling gave way even more, the growing hole revealing a shadowy figure dragging itself through the opening. The silhouette of Margaret Hollander emerged, her gaunt face contorted with fury, her sunken eyes fixed directly on Gloria. The lanterns suddenly reignited in a burst of flame, illuminating the horrifying figure as she dropped into the room without a sound, landing on her feet with unnatural grace. Alan pushed Gloria behind him, voice shaking. Leave her alone. Margaret moved toward them, her movements rigid and jerky, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. The receptionist bolted to the far corner, crying, "Don't look at her eyes." But Alan couldn't look away. Margaret raised her hand, pointing a trembling, bony finger at Gloria. You took her place, Margaret hissed with a voice so cold it pierced the air like winter steel. Before Alan could react, the little girl stepped between them, screaming, "Stop." The lantern flames exploded outward, throwing sparks across the room as the walls shook violently, and everything went white. The world vanished in a blinding flash of heat and cold colliding, as if the entire hotel had inhaled sharply, preparing for something far worse to come. The blinding flash faded slowly, and when Alan's vision finally returned, he found himself sprawled across the icy wooden floor of what looked like a different room altogether, though the walls, the windows, and even the air carried the same suffocating dread that clung to the Stanley Ridge Hotel like a living thing. Gloria lay beside him, coughing harshly as she tried to lift herself, while the receptionist, now pale as a sheet, was pressed against the far wall, staring upward with a wide-eyed horror that suggested the worst was not behind them at all. The lanterns, which had exploded moments earlier, now flickered strangely with their flames twisting upward like elongated fingers, illuminating the room with a distorted orange glow. Every breath Alan took felt heavy, thick with cold, as if he were exhaling winter itself. He reached for Gloria, helping her sit upright, whispering her name until her dazed eyes finally met his, full of terror and confusion. "Where are we?" she croaked, her teeth chattering. The receptionist swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "This isn't supposed to happen," she pulled us into the old wing. "This part of the hotel hasn't existed for 70 years. Gloria's eyes widened. "What do you mean it hasn't existed?" The receptionist gestured to the boarded windows and rotting beams overhead. "This wing burned down in 1954. There was never enough money to rebuild it. The fire started in the room where Margaret lost her mind. The place was condemned. But, sometimes she drags people here. People she thinks she can keep." The words made Alan's stomach twist into knots. "We have to get out," he said firmly, pulling Gloria to her feet. But the little girl stood only a few feet away, silent and trembling, as if afraid to speak. She stared at the charred floorboards beneath them, her lips shaking. "She's still here," the girl whispered, glancing fearfully toward the ceiling that creaked with the sound of shifting weight, slow, deliberate steps pacing above them in a continuous circle. Each step echoed heavily, vibrating through the burnt wooden beams like a heartbeat, steady and unnatural. Alan's pulse quickened. "Is there a way out?" he asked the receptionist. "A back entrance, a tunnel, anything?" The receptionist hesitated before nodding slowly. "There's an emergency door at the far end of this hall. It leads to a maintenance tunnel. But this wing twists itself. It never stays the same twice. Margaret controls it." Gloria felt tears burning at her eyes. "Why us? Why is she doing this?" The little girl's voice emerged in a shaky whisper. "She thinks you're her replacements. Mother and father. She wants a family again." Alan felt his blood run colder than the air around them. "We're getting out," he repeated, more to himself than the others. He took Gloria's hand again, and the group began moving toward the hallway door at the far end of the room. But when the receptionist tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. "Locked," he gasped. He twisted and pulled, but the metal refused to give. Then, without warning, the hallway beyond the door flickered like a dying television screen, walls shifting, stretching, contracting, until an entirely different corridor replaced the one they had glimpsed only seconds earlier. The little girl whimpered. "She's changing the hotel." The corridor now extended into a long, decaying passage lit by a series of dim bulbs that flickered erratically. Alan exhaled shakily. "We don't have another choice. We have to go." They stepped into the hallway, the wooden floor groaning under each cautious step. The lights buzzed overhead, some blinking rapidly like a Morse code warning, others dying completely. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, growing and shrinking in ways that didn't match their movements. Halfway down the corridor, the temperature plunged even lower, as if they'd entered the mouth of a crypt. Alan could see his breath swirling thickly in the air. "Don't stop," he muttered. "Keep going." But then they heard it, the soft, rhythmic tapping. Like fingernails against wood. Tap, tap, tap. Gloria froze, her grip tightening around Alan's hand. "Where is that coming from?" she whispered. The receptionist pointed with a trembling finger toward a door on the left, room 14B, though the numbers were crooked and partially melted, as if warped by old fire. The tapping grew louder. Faster. "Ignore it," Alan said, pulling them forward. But the tapping stopped abruptly. Silence filled the hallway like a held breath. Then, slowly, the door to room 14B creaked open, just a sliver. A single eye stared back at them through the narrow gap. Hollow. Gray. Unblinking. Gloria let out a strangled gasp as the door flung itself open fully, revealing Margaret's tall, skeletal frame standing inside, her face twisted in an expression of pure hatred. Her mouth opened unnaturally wide, too wide, as she let out a long, shrill wail that made the entire hallway vibrate. The light bulbs shattered one by one in a cascading explosion of sparks, plunging the corridor into near-total darkness. "Run!" Alan shouted. They sprinted down the hall, their footsteps pounding in chaotic rhythm as Margaret's distorted form lunged after them, gliding across the floor with impossible speed. The little girl cried out, "This way," pointing toward an intersecting hallway that hadn't been there a second earlier. They followed her, turning sharply into the new passage, but the walls around them seemed to pulse with life, breathing in and out, narrowing the space until they could barely move. Alan shoved his shoulder against the tightening wall, forcing enough room for Gloria to slip through, and the moment they were clear, the walls behind them slammed together with a sickening crunch, as if crushing something. But Margaret was still coming. They heard her, dragging, scraping, whispering their names in a voice that sounded like wine through a graveyard. Alan. Gloria, the receptionist stumbled as he ran, collapsing against the wall. I can't, my leg, Alan skidded to a stop. Come on. Get up. But before he could help, icy fingers wrapped around the receptionist's ankle and yanked him backward so violently he screamed. Alan reached for him, but the floor beneath the receptionist split open like a jaw, revealing darkness filled with whispering voices. He was dragged down into the black void before Alan could even blink, his scream echoing long after his body vanished. The floor snapped shut. Gloria sobbed, covering her mouth. "We can't stay here, Alan, please," the little girl tugged Alan's sleeve desperately. "You have to keep moving. She's almost here." They raced forward, turning corner after corner, the hallways shifting and rearranging behind them like a maze built by nightmares. Portraits on the walls watched them pass, eyes moving, lips twitching as though whispering warnings they couldn't quite hear. At last, they reached an old iron door with the words "Maintenance Access" etched above it. Alan grabbed the handle. It turned. The door swung open, releasing a gust of shockingly cold air that washed over them like the breath of a tomb. "Go," Alan said. Gloria entered first, shivering as she stepped into the pitch-black tunnel beyond. Alan was about to follow when he felt something lightly touch the back of his neck, cold, brittle, and unmistakably deliberate. He spun around. Margaret stood inches behind him, her face only partially illuminated by the flickering hallway light. Her eyes burned with hatred. Her fingers stretched toward him. Alan stumbled backward into the tunnel, slamming the iron door shut just as Margaret's hand struck the metal with a deafening clang that reverberated through the corridor. Gloria grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "She's going to break through." And she was. The door began to bend inward, the metal creaking under the force of something impossibly strong. The little girl appeared again beside them. Her voice urgent. "This is the last chance. If she gets you in the tunnels, she'll never let you out." Alan swallowed his fear, grabbing Gloria's hand as the maintenance tunnel lights flickered on one by one, stretching endlessly into darkness. "Then we run," he whispered. And together, they plunged deeper into the cold, endless tunnel, while behind them, the iron door began to tear open as if it were made of paper. The maintenance tunnel stretched into darkness ahead, the flickering lights casting long, distorted shadows that crawled along the concrete walls like living things, and Alan forced himself to keep moving, each step echoing against the damp, narrow corridor as if the sound alone could alert whatever followed them. Gloria clung tightly to his arm, her tears freezing in the bitter air that smelled of rust, mold, and something more sinister, an invisible weight pressing against their chests that made breathing difficult, and behind them, the iron door had finally been forced open, splintered metal groaning under the unnatural strength of Margaret Hollander, her skeletal frame emerging with horrifying grace, eyes blazing with fury and a hunger that was not human, a wail tearing from her mouth that vibrated through the tunnel and made the very walls shudder. And Alan knew in that instant that they were being hunted by something beyond comprehension, a presence that manipulated time and space, bending the hotel itself to her will, shifting walls, creating hallways that appeared and disappeared at whim, the little girl leading them just ahead, her small hand shaking as she pointed forward, whispering frantic warnings about collapsing floors and unseen pitfalls, and Alan had to ignore the panic that clawed at his mind to focus on every step, every turn, every flickering light as shadows twisted behind him like tendrils, and the air grew colder still, biting through jackets and coats, seeping into bones, making each heartbeat thunder in his ears, while whispers began to echo in the tunnel, soft at first, then growing in volume, voices calling out names, some familiar, some not, crying, pleading, screaming, a chorus of trapped souls warning them to flee, and suddenly the ground beneath Alan's feet trembled, a vibration that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and the walls seemed to breathe with a life of their own, narrowing, expanding, trying to crush them as they ran. And Margaret's voice pierced the cacophony, a scream that sounded like winter itself tearing through the air, "You will not leave. You belong here." Gloria screamed, and Alan felt her nails dig into his shoulder, but he kept moving, pushing forward through the twisting tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn revealing more horrors, old hotel furniture rotting in piles, chandeliers hanging precariously from broken ceilings, portraits of former guests whose eyes followed them, mouths opening in silent screams. And the little girl led them past a flooded section of the tunnel where the water reflected distorted images of Alan and Gloria, but every reflection showed them older, gaunt, eyes hollow, as if glimpsing the fates awaiting them if they failed, and the water rippled unnaturally as if something beneath it were aware of their presence, circling, waiting, and Alan felt his stomach churn with fear, knowing that Margaret could strike from anywhere, appearing from the ceiling, walls, or the floor, that the tunnels themselves were a weapon, alive and malevolent, designed to trap and torment intruders, and yet, ahead, a faint light glimmered, weak but steady, casting a narrow corridor beyond that seemed more stable, more real, like an exit, and he urged Gloria forward, whispering reassurances he didn't feel, but the light drew them onward, and as they approached, they saw a staircase leading upward, old metal steps slick with frost, and every instinct told them to run faster, but their legs felt heavy as though the tunnel resisted their movement, a psychic force draining energy, instilling despair, but finally they reached the bottom of the staircase, breathing ragged, the little girl tugging Alan's sleeve, pointing upward, urging them to climb, and they did, each step creaking under weight, each step echoing against the darkness above, and just as they neared the top, a shadow loomed behind them, stretching across the walls, a figure they could not fully comprehend, Margaret, her arms outstretched, face a grotesque mask of rage and sorrow, and a scream tore from Alan's throat as the floor beneath her shimmered like water, her form distorting, stretching, then rushing toward them with terrifying speed, and Alan stumbled, nearly falling backward, but Gloria grabbed his hand, pulling him up the last step, and they emerged into a dimly lit hallway that felt almost normal, yet every sound, every shadow carried menace, the flickering lights revealing the peeling wallpaper of the abandoned wing they had somehow escaped, and they ran, not knowing where they were going, just moving, desperate to get to the main lobby, the little girl now behind them, pointing frantically to the left, urging them toward what looked like a service exit, a narrow door with an emergency exit sign glowing faintly in green, and Alan reached it, fumbling with the handle, adrenaline lending him strength, the door finally swinging open into a snowy alley behind the hotel, the wind biting through their coats, snow whipping against their faces, and for a brief, impossible moment, they believed they had escaped, but the hotel loomed behind them, windows dark, silhouette jagged, and Alan knew in his heart it was not done, that Margaret's influence extended beyond the walls, that the hotel itself could reach into reality, to drag them back. And as they ran down the alley toward the tree lean, the little girl appeared beside them one last time, whispering, "She will watch, always, never forget, never rest," and then she vanished into the storm, leaving them alone in the blizzard, hearts pounding, lungs burning, snow blinding their path, yet behind them, faint shadows moved in the windows, silhouettes shifting with impossible angles, and Alan grabbed Gloria's hand tighter, refusing to look back, forcing themselves through the deep snow, each step a battle against the wind, their minds racing with everything they had seen, heard, felt, and the terror that would haunt them forever, knowing the Stanley Ridge Hotel would never truly release them, that it had marked them, imprinted their fear, and that somewhere, deep in the twisted, frozen halls, Margaret Hollander and her daughter's ghost waited patiently, eternally, for the next souls foolish enough to enter, and as Alan and Gloria disappeared into the dark forest, the wind carrying whispers of their names, they realized that even now, in the safety Of the snowy night, the cold, oppressive presence of the hotel clung to their minds, a relentless reminder that the horrors they had survived were not only real but eternal, that every shadow might contain her gaze, every whisper in the wind might be Margaret speaking, and that the Stanley Ridge Hotel, with its frozen corridors, shifting tunnels, and vengeful spirits, had become a permanent scar upon their reality, forever altering the way they perceived the world. And as the snowstorm swallowed them whole, they ran not just from the hotel, but from the knowledge that some places, some spirits, and some horrors were beyond escape, beyond understanding, and Alan knew with a bone-deep certainty that the story they had lived would be told, whispered, feared, but never fully believed, because no one could comprehend the terror of a haunted place that bends time, traps souls, and watches endlessly, a malevolent monument to obsession, grief, and the supernatural wrath of a mother who lost everything, yet would never relinquish her claim on those who dared to enter her domain.